Hi, I'm Lee Brunellen, traditional naturopath, healer, and whole food expert, and today we'll be talking about how to reduce your cancer risk. You know, it's very appropriate today because nearly 700,000 Americans die each and every single year from cancer. And in fact, it's the second most common cause of death in the United States. So what we discuss right now could save your life or that of your family. To help prevent cancer, or at least lower your cancer risk, we have to know what causes cancer, and that's what we'll talk about when we come back. Welcome back. Slight technical difficulties there for a second. Hope you're still on board. So let's talk about the causes of cancer. The first cause, and can't say it's the most common, but it's certainly quite prevalent, is deficiency. It can be deficiency of several different things. Of course, the obvious ones are vitamins and minerals, and the not so obvious may be fats, lipids specifically, and antioxidants. And we'll talk about how those actually can create cancerous effects within the body in just a moment. Now, one of the things about lipids is that not only do we have to make sure that we have the appropriate form of fats, but we also need to make sure that we are reducing our susceptibility to rancid fats as well. Now, rancid fats actually are quite common, or actually synthetic industrial fats are very common. You would know synthetic industrial fats as trans fats. And you know, you see these no trans fats types of products. Well, I'm here to tell you that what that actually means by government definition is that they have less than a half a gram per serving of these trans fats, of these synthetic industrial fats. Well, to my way of thinking, that's not zero. That's still a certain amount of it, because your body's limit for these toxic forms of fats is a great big fat zero. It is zero. Your body cannot handle any type of these synthetic fats. Returning back to rancid fats are very carcinogenic. They are inflammatory. They affect the cells dramatically. So, for example, it's a common practice for people to use olive oils for frying, high heat types of cooking, and unfortunately, that turns many olive oils rancid. They should not be heated definitely above 160 degrees, and so you need more of a saturated type of fat if you're going to be using any type of high heat at all. Coconut oil. You have to be careful with butter because it can start smoking and get too hot pretty rapidly. Pork fat can be beneficial. Also, you need the proper ratio of fats because this is how you get the strongest cell membrane, and we're going to be talking about that in just a moment in a little more detail. So don't only concentrate on omega-6s like vegetable oils or omega-3s like fish oils. You do need also the medium and long-chain fatty acids that you'll find in different animal fats, such as beef and chicken and so forth, and pork, etc., etc. So fats, very, very important, and antioxidants as well are quite important. You can find those in veggies. You can find those in fruits as well, but you have to be somewhat careful and limit your fruit intake because of what you'll see in just a moment. So what is the other form of or cause of cancer? That is toxicity. Of course, there are heavy metals. Let me turn this way so you can see it a little bit easier. That's a very prevalent form of toxicity now. Dental fillings, dental amalgams, they can be even in hair dyes, nail polishes, tattoos. You get all different kinds of heavy metals just from those sources. As well as food sources, you can get heavy metals. For example, high fructose corn syrup is very high in lead and mercury. Just search that online. You'll find different articles and news sources that are talking about the fairly high degree of lead and mercury in corn syrups. Environmental toxicity, pesticides, etc., as you see below there. Also hormones that occur in food, and also prescription hormones. In fact, that is some of the side effects. Can be breast cancers, reproductive cancers, etc., from taking these different forms of hormones, regardless if they're male hormones or female hormones. Cancer is a side effect. Personal care products. Personal care products are full of all kinds of chemicals that are extremely damaging. Paraffins, parabens being one of the more common, like paraben waxes that you can go to nail salons or whatever, and they can give you a paraben wax over your hands. I think they also do it on the feet, don't know. But those are seriously damaging. They're extremely carcinogenic. They react like hormones or estrogens specifically within the body and affect the cells in that way. So you do not want personal care products with all these other forms of toxic chemicals and parabens, etc. Antibiotics. Antibiotics are also known to be cancer agents, as well as fake food. Obviously any type of synthetic food, one of the issues can be cancer. Just ask California, Prop 65, right? So what happens? Well, take a look over here, if you can see it. It's a drawing that I've made of a normal healthy cell. Now, we know that what normal healthy cells need, other than nutrients and minerals and fats, etc., the materials in order to survive and thrive, they also need oxygen. And a typical normally functioning cell has 4 receptors, and receptors are like gateways or doorways into the cell. They have 4 receptors for oxygen specifically. Well, let's say that someone is consuming a form of toxicity in these fake foods. In this case, let's use an artificial sweetener. One that is more common, that is even talked about as being more natural, is Splenda. So not stevia. Stevia is, even though highly processed, it is an herb. Splenda, on the other hand, is not. It is extracted from sugarcane. It is called sucralose, and when it is metabolized by the body, well, it is metabolized into chlorine, like chlorine bleach. Well, what happens is that the chlorine is taken up into one of these cell receptors. So let's just take this one right here, and so, okay, now we don't have this cell receptor for oxygen. So what happens? Well, that means now you have 25% less oxygen in this previously healthy functioning cell. So it's beginning to suffocate, as well as because this doorway is being blocked, and other cell receptors are going to be blocked by different forms of toxicities, it cannot get the nutrition that it needs into the cell, and it cannot remove the waste products. So there's a cell respiration. You have to have nutrients going into the cell, and you have to have byproducts, waste products coming out. So remember, a moment ago I talked about how important lipids are, fats are. Well, that's because around the cell, if you can see here, I've drawn a little bitty, teeny tiny little circles, and those are to represent the lipid or cellular membrane around a normal healthy cell. And what happens is that when you consume either an improper ratio of fats, or especially when you consume any kind of these synthetic fats or rancid fats or those types of things, they start creating like a barrier around these cell membranes, around these lipid membranes, and also toxicities such as heavy metals start forming a barrier around the cell membrane. So again, the proper nutrients cannot get into the cell to feed it, and the byproducts, waste products cannot get out. As well as if you consume improper fats, improper ratio of fats, then the cell membrane itself, even though it may be there, even though there may not be a barrier, let's say that you've cleaned up your environment, you're not using personal care products that are full of different kinds of toxicities, you're not using hair dyes that are full of different kinds of heavy metals, like chromium or whatever the case may be. Titanium dioxide is in a lot of personal care products. So you've gotten rid of all those things. You're not painting your fingernails or using cosmetics that are full of heavy metals and other toxic materials. And the problem is, though, is that if you're not eating the proper ratio of fats, like you're trying to be low fat because animal fats are quote unquote bad for you, right? Then what happens is this cell membrane becomes very weak and can destabilize the cell. So again, fats in the proper form, proper ratios, very, very important. So what happens then is that when there's this barrier that's formed around the cell membrane, around that fatty membrane of the cell, and those toxins start creating a barrier, is that the cell begins suffocating. So think about it. You have toxicity that's blocking the actual doorways for oxygen into the cell, and then you have like plastic wrap around the cell. The cell begins to suffocate to death. And so what happens? Well, instead of being like a person with cellophane wrapped around their head and suffocating to death, the cells respond by mutating. And they start looking for a different type of food. And what will happen is that these unhealthy cells, once they start mutating, because in the past they've been suffocated of the oxygen that they need in order to be healthy, they start creating many more different receptors. Again, receptors are doorways, gateways into the cell. And what these receptors are for is for glucose, is for sugar. Well, why? Because now these unhealthy cells are turning to a fermentation process in order to grow and proliferate, which is what you do not want cancer to do. You do not want it to proliferate. And the only way that it can proliferate is if it's getting enough of the glucose within the blood in order for you to have this proliferation of the cells. All right? Not quite sure why it was doing that, making a noise in my audio, but I'll try to be... It was a very strange sound. Oh, I see. It's just acoustics of the room. How interesting. Okay, back on track. So that also shows that diet, going back to what we talked about in the beginning, as far as vitamins, minerals, lipids, antioxidants, what can happen, by the way, is if you get the proper amounts of antioxidants, so going back to what we talked about before, is how a deficiency in antioxidants can actually be a cause of cancer. If you have enough antioxidants, so that means you're eating the right veggies and maybe minimal amounts of fruit, but the right kinds of fruit with lower fructose in it, is that they can, in effect, create a barrier to the toxicity that's trying to come into that cell receptor to block the oxygen. They create a barrier there. So, the healthy fats create a nice, strong membrane that keeps the cells together and keeps the cell intact, and removing the different forms of toxicity within your environment and personal care products, etc., and the food products. It keeps a barrier from forming around that cell membrane. But antioxidants help protect the cell receptors and help to keep toxicities of various forms from being able to either get stuck within that doorway, within that cell receptor, or to penetrate into the cell and start having effects that way. So it's very important that we have lower amounts of carbohydrates within our diet, because carbohydrates equal sugar, glucose equals potential fermentation for the cells and therefore proliferation. So, if a person is dealing with cancer currently, or they have a history of cancer, then they should really be on what's called a nutritional ketogenic diet. And this is not where, like in the past 40, 50 years ago of the Atkins diet, and you peed on a keto stick and saw if you had a high enough level of ketones or not. No, this is nutritional ketosis. It's monitoring the blood. It's keeping track of what's called a glucose ketone index. There may be actual fairly long stints of fasting involved, trying to reduce the amount of glucose within the body and really switch over the ability of the body from burning this glucose into burning lipids, so that the cells that are now unhealthy and trying to proliferate don't have what they need in order to do that they don't have the glucose or the sugar for the fermentation process. So diet's key. And then, of course, the obvious, removing toxicity from the environment. One that is very important is pesticides. They're all over in the food. You have to eat organic. It's not that there aren't any pesticides in the organic food. It just means that there's less potential for it. And if you know that it's a cancer risk to consume foods that are certainly sprayed with pesticides, why would you not try to eat organic foods that you know have less potential for that? So it is very, very important. As well as some of these pesticides are shown to have mutagenic effects specifically within cells. And just think about how scary that is. Actually, on our Facebook page, the Natural Health Clinic. So if you want to look at our Facebook page, go to facebook.com. Well, actually, you're already looking at it if you're watching this video. Just scroll down and take a look at one of the articles that I posted from Scientific American. There's this pesticide called atrazine, which has shown that certain type or species of frog, when they're exposed to this pesticide, it's a literal gender bender. Either the males start having effeminate characteristics, female characteristics, or there can actually be complete sexual reversals where the male transforms into a female of the species and can reproduce after coitus with a male frog that I guess hasn't been ingested in the atrazine. So, point is, pesticides can be very, very bad stuff. That's not even to mention glyphosate that has all kinds of effects. So, removing them as much as you can from your food sources, and then don't spray them in your environment. Don't spray them anywhere in your yard, all right? Not around the house, not inside the house. Don't fumigate anything. These things are bad. And, once you've sprayed inside the home, let's say you fumigate, all right? You have these roach bombs or whatever. These chemicals, they eventually dry and turn into a dust, like the case of a bomb. So it's everywhere and all the surfaces. It's in the ceiling, the walls, all the surfaces, the floor. As it dries, it turns into a dust, and so it's just covering everything. It doesn't go away, all right? So you are exposed to these chemicals for a very long period of time, months, years, continuously.